My maid of honor was sleeping with my fiancé for months. I found out 11 days before the wedding and let her give the toast anyway. I found out my maid of honor had been sleeping with my fiancé 11 days before the wedding, and I still let her stand up in front of 200 people and give the toast. I watched her hold that microphone with the same hand she used to text him, "Can't stop thinking about last night." And I smiled because I already had a plan, and that plan required her to open her mouth first. But before I tell you what happened when she did, I need to back up. Because none of this makes sense unless you understand who we were before that night. Three girls who used to swear nothing could break us. I met Rachel and Megan the second week of freshman year in a dorm hallway that smelled like burnt popcorn when Rachel knocked on my door asking if anyone had a phone charger because hers had died during a call with her mom. I lent her mine. 20 minutes later, she was sitting cross-legged on my bed, eating my emergency stash of pretzels like she'd known me for years. And somehow that turned into Megan wandering over from 2 doors down because she heard us laughing too loud at 11 at night on a Tuesday. That was it. That was the whole origin story. No dramatic bonding moment, no crisis that threw us together. Just three 18-year-olds who liked the same terrible reality TV and never really stopped hanging out after that. We did the things you do. We survived a statistics class none of us understood by dividing up the homework and copying each other with our own handwriting, so the professor wouldn't notice. We stood in line for 4 hours to see a band none of us even really liked because Megan had a crush on the drummer. We held Rachel's hair back more times than I want to admit, and she held mine right back the 2 times I earned it. When my parents split up during sophomore year, it was Rachel who drove 6 hours round trip on a Friday night, just so I wouldn't be alone in my apartment. And it was Megan who called every single day for 2 weeks afterward. Not to talk about anything in particular, just to make sure I picked up the phone. So when I tell you that Rachel was the obvious choice for maid of honor, I need you to understand it wasn't a formality. It wasn't, well, I have to pick someone. She had earned that title over 9 years of exactly the kind of small, unglamorous loyalty that actually matters. Megan, if I'm honest, had drifted a little in the last 2 years. She'd taken a promotion that had her working brutal hours at a marketing firm downtown, and our group texts had gone from daily to weekly to, "Sorry, I've been slammed, let's catch up soon." More times than either of us wanted to admit. So when I asked Rachel to stand up there with me and not Megan, it wasn't a rejection. Yeah, it was just where we all were. Ryan, I met at a coffee shop near my office. In the kind of meet cute I used to roll my eyes at in movies, he grabbed my drink by mistake because the barista called out medium oat milk latte, and we'd apparently both ordered exactly the same thing. He laughed about it in a way that wasn't trying too hard, bought me a second one to apologize, and asked for my number before I'd even sat back down. He was 31, worked in commercial real estate, drove a car that was a little too nice for someone his age, and joked about it before I could, and had this habit. I noticed it on our third date and found it endearing for over 2 years, of checking his phone the second we sat down anywhere, just to silence it, and then not touching it again until we left. "Rude to keep it out," he told me once. "My dad always said if you're at the table, be at the table." I loved that about him. I want you to remember that detail because it's going to matter. We got engaged on a Tuesday in October on the back porch of his parents' lake house. No crowd, no photographer hiding in the bushes. Just him getting down on one knee while I still had a paper towel in my hand from drying dishes. It was perfect specifically because it wasn't a production. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We planned an 11-month engagement, which everyone told me was either too long or too short, and I ignored all of them. Venue was a renovated barn out in the Vermont hills. String lights, that whole aesthetic. Booked a full year in advance because apparently every bride in the tri-state area has the same Pinterest board. 206 guests. My mother, Diane, cried during the tasting when she tried the lemon cake. My father, who does not cry, cried a little too, though he'd deny it if you asked him. Rachel threw herself into maid of honor duties with what I thought was enthusiasm. She came to 4 dress fittings. She built a spreadsheet on an actual color-coded spreadsheet, tracking RSVPs, dietary restrictions, who was allergic to what. She planned the bachelorette weekend down to a scavenger hunt with inside jokes from our entire friendship. Little cards that said things like, "Find something the color of the shirt Ryan wore on their first date," which meant she had to have asked him what he wore, which meant they'd talked privately about our first date. I thought that was sweet. I thought that was thoughtful. I didn't think anything of it at all. The bachelorette weekend happened about 3 months before the wedding, a rented house on the coast with 8 of us total. And it's worth mentioning because of one specific night. We'd all had too much wine, sitting out on the deck around midnight, and the conversation drifted, the way it does, into the What do you actually think about the wedding territory that only comes out after the third bottle? One of my college friends, a girl named Priya who I hadn't seen in almost a year, asked Rachel, half joking, whether she was jealous watching me get married while she was still single. I remember Rachel laughing a beat too long before she answered, swirling her glass, saying, honestly, sometimes. Not of the wedding. Just of, I don't know, having someone look at you like that. Everyone nodded, sympathetic, the way you do when a single friend admits something vulnerable at a bachelorette party, and I squeezed her hand and told her she'd find her person too. I didn't think about that comment again for months. I think about it constantly now. There was also that same weekend, a moment I only understood in hindsight. Rachel got a text partway through dinner on the first night, glanced at it, and excused herself to call her mom back, which struck absolutely no one as strange because Rachel called her mom constantly. It was one of her most consistent habits. She was gone for almost 25 minutes. When she came back, her eyes were a little red, and she blamed it on the wind. That's the ordinary part. That's what I want you to hold on to. The version of my life where everyone I loved was exactly who I thought they were, and the biggest problem I had most days was whether the florist could get peonies in April. The crack when it came was so small I almost laughed about it at the time. It was a Sunday, about 5 months before the wedding, and Ryan and I were at his parents' place for dinner, the same lake house where he'd proposed. His phone buzzed on the counter while he was grilling outside, and out of habit, the habit he'd taught me was normal, the be at the table thing. I almost didn't even look at it. But it buzzed twice more, fast, the way texts do when someone's mid-conversation and waiting on a reply, and some small animal part of my brain glanced at the screen before I could stop myself. It was a name I recognized. Not a full name, just R, with a little heart emoji next to it. The kind of contact name you'd give a friend or a sister, or I told myself immediately, absolutely nothing to worry about. The preview text just said, LOL, you're ridiculous. Okay, fine. See you Thurs. I remember standing there in his mother's kitchen holding a dish towel, staring at 4 words that meant nothing, telling myself they meant nothing, while some quieter, older part of me, the part that had watched my own father's phone light up with a name that turned out to mean everything, sat up straight and took notice. I didn't say anything that night. What would I even say? Who's R? He had a cousin named Rebecca. He had a coworker, I was fairly sure, named Rachel too, actually, a different Rachel, which almost made me laugh at the coincidence later, in the darkest way possible. I told myself it could be anyone. I told myself the heart emoji was probably just how his phone auto-saved contacts from some group text years ago. I told myself a lot of things. But here's the thing about a crack. Once you've seen it, you can't stop running your finger over it. For the next 2 weeks, I found myself doing things I'd never done in 3 years with Ryan. I noticed when he stepped out to take a call during a dinner with my parents. I noticed that he'd started leaving his phone face down, which he hadn't done before, not because I'd ever cared, but because he apparently now did. I noticed he was working late twice a week instead of once, and that when I asked to swing by his office with dinner as a surprise, he said the building was doing security renovations, and visitors weren't allowed for a few weeks, which struck me, even as he said it, as an oddly specific and oddly convenient thing to say. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters for anyone listening to this who's been in a similar spot. I almost let it go. Not because I trusted him completely, but because the alternative was so much worse than staying comfortable. If I didn't look, I didn't have to know. My wedding dress was already altered. The deposits were non-refundable. My mother had already ordered save the dates with both our names stitched into little gold foil hearts. Looking felt like risking something I wasn't ready to lose, even if it turned out there was nothing there. It was Megan who talked me off that ledge, and honestly, that's the first time in almost 2 years I remembered exactly why she'd mattered so much to me in college. I called her on a Wednesday night, ostensibly to catch up, and ended up crying on the phone about a coincidence and a heart emoji that objectively meant nothing. And I remember bracing for her to tell me I was being paranoid. Instead, she went quiet for a second and said, "Okay, I'm not going to tell you you're crazy, because you've never been the type to make things up. What does your gut say?" And when I admitted quietly that my gut said something was wrong, she didn't try to talk me out of it. She said, "Then we're going to find out calmly and quietly, and we're not going to blow up your entire wedding over a text message until we actually know something." That became our plan. Not confrontation, information. Over the next several weeks, Megan and I fell into an easy, almost business-like rhythm, the two of us reconnecting in the worst possible circumstances, but reconnecting all the same. She'd ask casual questions when she ran into Ryan at group things. "How's work been? Still crazy busy?" And report back what he said. cross-referencing it against what he'd told me. She sat with me one night while I quietly went through the shared photo album on our family cloud account, an album Ryan didn't know synced automatically from his phone, looking at nothing in particular, just timestamps and locations, feeling a little sick about how much this felt like spying on someone I was supposed to be marrying in a few months. Megan and I developed what we half-jokingly started calling the log, a private note on my phone, dated entries, nothing dramatic, just small factual observations. February 14th, R canceled dinner plans with me last minute, said she had a work thing unconfirmed. February 21st, Ryan at the gym until almost 10 p.m. on a weeknight. Gym bag in his car looked dry. March 2nd, R showed up to cake tasting wearing perfume I'd never seen her wear before, got defensive when I asked what it was, said it was just something new. None of it on its own would have held up to anyone else as evidence of anything. Together, entry after entry, it built a shape I didn't want to look directly at, but couldn't stop tracing with my finger anyway. There was a night, about 6 weeks into this, when I nearly gave the entire thing away. Ryan and I were lying in bed and he made some offhand joke about the wedding seating chart, something like, "Just don't sit me next to my ex-roommate. That guy talks my ear off." Completely normal, completely harmless, and I felt this hot, sudden urge to just ask him. Just say the name. Just watch his face and see what happened. I had the question sitting right at the back of my teeth. I didn't ask it. I rolled over and said goodnight instead, and I lay there afterward hating myself a little for not knowing, one way or the other, whether I even wanted an answer. One Saturday morning during those weeks, I did something I'm still a little embarrassed to admit. Ryan had gone for a run, left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, still logged into his email from paying a bill the night before. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the inbox, not touching anything, telling myself I wasn't the kind of person who did this. Then I searched one word, Rachel. 6 emails came up, all mundane, all wedding logistics. A shared spreadsheet link, a question about groomsmen boutonnieres, a forwarded confirmation for the rehearsal dinner reservation. Nothing. I remember the strange, hollow relief of that nothing, followed almost immediately by the recognition that anyone smart enough to keep a secret for months was also smart enough not to leave it in an email labeled Rachel, a logistics. I closed the laptop exactly the way I'd found it and never told him I'd looked. Around that same time, Megan suggested something that made my stomach turn when she first said it out loud, and that I agreed to anyway. She wanted to test it. Not entrap anyone, just confirm. So one Sunday afternoon, while I was supposedly at a dress fitting that had actually ended an hour early, Megan sent Rachel a casual text asking if she wanted to grab coffee that evening. Something totally normal, something Rachel said yes to within minutes. Then, 20 minutes later, I sent Ryan a text of my own, telling him I'd be stuck at my parents' house late helping my mom with seating chart stuff, home by 10 at the earliest. It wasn't a trap exactly, it was just 2 ordinary lies, dropped into 2 ordinary days to see whether either of them would suddenly find themselves free at the same time. They did. Rachel canceled the coffee with Megan 40 minutes before it was supposed to happen, blaming a migraine, and Ryan texted me around 6 to say he might swing by the gym and grab dinner on his own. No big deal, don't wait up. I sat in Megan's car outside her apartment for a long time after that, not saying much, just watching the numbers change on the digital clock on her dashboard. 6:01, 6:02. Feeling something in my chest settle into a kind of grim, quiet certainty that was almost worse than panic. Panic, at least, still had room for doubt in it. This didn't. There was another night, a worse one, when I almost gave up looking altogether. Not because I'd stopped suspecting something, but because I was exhausted by my own suspicion. I remember telling Megan, half in tears, "I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I feel insane. Maybe I made this whole thing up in my head out of some kind of pre-wedding anxiety." And she let me say all of that, didn't argue with a word of it, and then just asked one question. "Do you actually believe that, or do you just wish you did?" I didn't have an answer for her. That was the answer. The turn-reverse, the moment everything got worse and more personal and impossible to unknow, came on a Thursday night in March, exactly the kind of Thurs that forward text had once mentioned in passing months before, though I didn't put that together until later. I'd gone to pick up my dress from its final fitting, a surprise for myself more than anyone, wanting a quiet hour alone with it before the chaos of the final weeks began. On my way home, I decided, on a whim I still can't fully explain, to drive past Ryan's office instead of taking my usual route just to see the building lit up at night. Some sentimental impulse about the life we were building. His car was in the lot, which made sense. He worked late a lot now. What didn't make sense was the second car parked next to his, in a mostly empty lot at 9 at night, in spots reserved for employees who badge in, a car with a university alumni sticker on the back windshield from our school, the same one all three of us had gone to, the same sticker Rachel had put on her own back windshield the week she got engaged to nobody, joking that at least her car could commit to something. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself there were 100 people from our graduating class in this city. I sat in my own car for 11 minutes, telling myself that before I got a text from Rachel, unprompted, cheerful, asking how the dress fitting went, hoping I'd send a picture, sent, according to the timestamp, at 9:04 p.m. from somewhere. I didn't ask where. There's a version of this story where I storm into that parking lot, march up to the passenger window of that car, and demand answers right then, at 9 at night, still holding my wedding dress in a garment bag over my arm. I thought about it. I sat there with my hand on the door handle for a good 30 seconds. But some cold, clear part of my brain, the part that had spent weeks preparing for exactly this possibility without ever fully admitting it was preparing, told me that if I did that now, in a parking lot at night, exhausted and half out of my mind, I would hand them both the exact narrative they'd need to survive it. A messy, emotional, half-witnessed confrontation with no one else around to see it. They'd comfort each other in the aftermath. They'd get their stories aligned before I even got home. I took my hand off the door handle. I didn't confront anyone that night. I went home, sat on my bathroom floor with the door locked, and let myself feel exactly as awful as the situation deserved for about 20 minutes. Then I got up, washed my face, and called Megan, and told her I thought I knew who R was, and I watched in my mind this whole slow-motion collapse of 9 years of friendship, and I made a decision that surprises me a little, even now looking back. I decided not to confront them yet. Some people hearing this think that sounds cold, or strategic in a way that isn't very sympathetic. I've thought about that a lot since. But here's what was actually happening in my head. If I confronted them separately, they'd have time to get their stories straight, time to comfort each other, time to decide together how to spin it to me, how to soften it, how to make it about a moment of weakness instead of what it actually was. An active, ongoing, months-long decision they'd both made repeatedly while helping me pick out centerpieces. I didn't want their coordinated version of events. I wanted the truth to happen in a room I controlled, in front of the people who loved me, at a moment they couldn't spin their way out of. So I did something that took more discipline than almost anything I've ever done. I kept planning the wedding. I let Rachel keep her spreadsheet. I let her keep the Maid of Honor title, kept her in every fitting, every phone call, every dumb bridal shower game. And I smiled through every single one of them, because the version of me that smiled was buying time, and the version of me that broke down could wait 11 more days. Megan became the only person who knew besides me in those final weeks, not my mother, because I couldn't bear to watch her carry that alongside everything else she was doing to make the day perfect, and not my other bridesmaids, because I genuinely didn't know at that point who else might already know and be keeping it from me too. Megan helped me build a small, quiet file of what we had, screenshots of that photo album, dates and timestamps, the parking lot, and eventually 3 days before the wedding, something I hadn't even had to go looking for. Rachel left her phone unlocked on the table at the final dress steaming appointment, face up, while she went to the bathroom, and a text came through from Ryan that just said, 3 more days, and I still don't know how I'm going to do this. I read it in about 2 seconds and put the phone face down exactly where it had been before she came back. I didn't need anything else after that. The rehearsal dinner was the night before. A smaller thing, 40 people at a restaurant my future in-laws liked downtown, and it is looking back the closest I came to breaking my own plan. Rachel gave a small, informal toast there too. A preview, I realize now, for the real one. And at one point, mid-story, she caught my eye across the table and smiled in a way that was so familiar, so exactly like every smile she'd given me for 9 years, that for one disorienting second, I genuinely wondered whether I'd imagined the entire thing, whether the log on my phone and the parking lot and the text from 3 days earlier had all been some elaborate act of self-sabotage on my part instead of hers. That's the part nobody warns you about. How good a person can be at being who you've always known them to be, right up until the exact moment they aren't. My father, who didn't know anything yet, pulled me aside near the end of the night while I was getting my coat and asked out of nowhere, "You doing okay? You've seemed somewhere else all week." I remember the specific effort it took to look him in the eye and say, "I was just tired, just wedding stress. Everyone says brides get like this." He studied my face for a second longer than felt comfortable, the way fathers do when they know you well enough to know you're not telling them everything, and then he let it go, because he trusted me, the same way I trusted the 2 people who were about to blow up my life the following evening. I've thought about that exchange more than almost any other moment that week. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd just told him right there in the coat check line. I know exactly what would have happened. He would have canceled the wedding himself that same night, and I wouldn't have gotten the room full of witnesses I needed. So I said I was fine, and I hugged him, and I went home to lie awake next to the man I was still technically supposed to marry in the morning. The wedding day itself, I want you to know, was beautiful. That's the strange, almost cruel thing about it. The sky did exactly what my mother had prayed for, clear and cool for late April. The barn looked like something out of the magazine spread I'd been chasing for a year, and my father cried again, walking me down the aisle. No acting required on my part for that moment, because whatever else was happening underneath it, I really was marrying someone I'd loved, and some small, stubborn part of me still hoped, right up until the vows, that I was wrong about all of it. I wasn't wrong. But I said my vows anyway because a version of this plan required the ceremony to happen exactly as scheduled, and because some petty, human part of me wanted every single person in that barn to witness what I'd built before they watched it get pulled apart on purpose. The reception moved into toasts around 8:30, string lights fully lit by then, 206 people fed, and a little drunk on the good kind of open bar wine. My father went first, a warm, rambling toast about the daughter who used to negotiate her bedtime like a defense attorney. Then it was Rachel's turn. She stood up in the pale blue dress we'd picked out together 4 months earlier, tapped her glass with a fork the way she'd rehearsed, and the room quieted down for her, the way rooms do for the maid of honor, expecting warmth, expecting inside jokes, expecting exactly what she'd delivered at every engagement party and shower leading up to this. She started strong. She told the popcorn hallway story, the 4-hour concert line story, the 6-hour drive after my parents split story, and the room laughed in all the right places, because it was, underneath everything, a true and good story about real friendship. Then she got to the part about Ryan. And when Emily met Ryan, she said, glass raised, voice a little unsteady in a way everyone assumed was emotion, I knew right away he was one of the good ones. I mean, I got to know him almost as well as she did over the last year, planning all of this together, and I can tell you, the way that man talks about her, the way he shows up for her, and here her voice actually did catch for real this time, and I watched her throat move like she was swallowing something down. It's rare. It's genuinely rare to find someone who's that loyal. I let that word sit in the air for exactly as long as it took me to stand up. I didn't yell. I want to be clear about that because I know how these stories usually go in people's heads, and that's not what happened. I stood, glass still in my hand, and I said, loud enough for the microphone Rachel was still holding to catch it, loyal. That's a really interesting word for you to use, Rach. The room did that thing rooms do. A ripple of confused laughter. People assuming it was a joke. A bit. Some inside reference they weren't in on. Rachel's smile stayed frozen for 1 full second too long. My mother, 3 seats down, went very still. Ryan at the head table beside me turned toward me with an expression that hadn't caught up to what was happening yet. I have something for the toast too, actually, I said, and I pulled my phone out of the little clutch I'd kept it in all day, specifically for this. Since we're talking about loyalty, I read the message out loud, the one from 3 days before the wedding. 3 more days, and I still don't know how I'm going to do this. I watched it land on 206 faces at once. The specific, terrible physics of a secret becoming public in real time, spreading outward from the head table like something dropped in water. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Someone near the back actually gasped, an honest-to-God gasp, the kind you'd think only happened in movies. Ryan stood up so fast his chair went over backward. Emily, let me explain. You don't have 3 days anymore, I said. You have right now in front of everyone who came here because they believed in this. Rachel hadn't moved. She was still holding the microphone, which somehow made it worse. This live audio feed of her own breathing while 200 people stared at her. It's not, we didn't mean for it to, she started, and then just stopped, because there wasn't an end to that sentence that made any of it better. I should tell you what the room looks like in that first frozen second, because I think about it more than almost anything else from that night. 206 people mid-chew on wedding cake, forks stopped halfway to mouths. The DJ, who'd clearly been half listening for his cue to start the first dance, standing up slightly from his booth like he wasn't sure whether to play something or stay silent. My grandmother, 91 years old, leaning over to my aunt and asking, loud enough for 3 tables to hear, "Wait, what did she say?" And underneath all of it, the string lights still glowing exactly the way they had glowed during the vows an hour earlier, completely indifferent to the fact that everything underneath them had just changed. A few small things happened in that frozen moment that I only pieced together later from other guests. because I genuinely couldn't process everything in real time myself. My cousin, sitting near the back, had already started quietly filming on her phone before she even understood what was happening, purely on reflex, the way you do at a wedding when someone taps a glass. That video, or a clip of it, ended up circulating among family group chats within the hour, which is its own strange, modern layer of humiliation nobody prepares you for. Not just living through the worst moment of your life, but knowing there's now a 12-second vertical video of it saved on your aunt's phone forever. One of Ryan's groomsmen, a guy named Marcus who'd known him since middle school, stood up so abruptly his own chair nearly went into the cake table and said, loud enough for the head table to hear, "Bro, tell me this isn't true," which somehow landed harder than anything I'd said myself because it meant even the people on Ryan's side, the people who loved him unconditionally, weren't rushing to assume I was wrong. I'm not going to pretend the next 20 minutes were calm. They weren't. There was shouting, not from me mostly. I'd said what I needed to say and found in the moment that I didn't have much left in me for volume. It came from my father, who crossed the room toward Ryan with an expression I'd genuinely never seen on his face before and had to be physically held back by my uncle. It came from Rachel's own mother, who was there, who stood up with her napkin still in her lap and said her daughter's full name in a voice that cut through the whole barn. Megan, who I'd told everything 2 weeks earlier, was already at my side before I'd even fully sat back down, one hand on my back, not saying anything, just present, the way she'd been on every one of those late-night phone calls. What surprised me most in the chaos of those first few minutes wasn't Ryan or Rachel at all. It was watching my bridal party fracture in real time around them. One of my other bridesmaids, a coworker named Sophia, who barely knew Rachel outside of wedding events, physically stepped away from her, actually took 2 steps back like she wanted daylight between them. Rachel's own brother, who'd flown in from Chicago for the weekend, put his hand on her shoulder and then, after a few seconds of watching her not deny anything, quietly took it away again. Nobody rushed to defend her. That told me almost as much as the text message had. Ryan tried 3 separate times over the next hour to get me alone to talk. I let him have exactly one of those attempts, out on the barn's back porch, string lights still up, the same kind of setting where he'd once proposed to me on his parents' dock. He said the things people say. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake that got out of hand. He loved me. He'd been going to end it. He swore he'd been going to end it. I asked him one question. When? He didn't have an answer, which was, in its own way, the most honest thing he said to me all night. The wedding obviously did not become a marriage. My father quietly handled canceling the honeymoon, got most of the deposit back through some combination of persistence, and, I suspect, genuine sympathy from the resort. My mother spent the next several days doing the thing mothers do, showing up with soup and silence and just enough conversation to keep me from disappearing into my own head. Even my dress became its own small saga. The boutique offered to buy it back at a fraction of what we'd paid, which my mother refused on principle, so it sat in a garment bag in my old childhood closet for almost 2 months before I finally decided, on a random Tuesday, to donate it to an organization that resells wedding dresses and puts the money toward domestic violence shelters. Something about that felt like the only genuinely good thing that dress was ever going to do, and packing it into the donation box felt lighter than I expected it to. Rachel called 11 times in the first week. I didn't answer any of them. She sent a long message eventually, one of those messages that starts as an apology and slowly turns into an explanation of her own loneliness, her own feelings that had just happened. And somewhere in paragraph 4, she used the word unintentional, which is the point where I stopped reading and blocked her number instead. Ryan, for what it's worth, tried the longer game. Flowers to my parents' house where I was staying, a handwritten letter I didn't open, a mutual friend enlisted to just get me to hear him out. None of it worked, not because I was trying to punish him, but because I genuinely no longer wanted what he was offering. You can't unknow 11 texts and a parking lot and a maid of honor's unsteady voice at your own wedding. Some things, once you see them clearly, just stop being negotiable. Ryan's parents called me twice in the days after, and I only picked up the second time, mostly out of exhaustion. His mother, Carol, who I genuinely liked for 3 years, who had hosted Thanksgiving for me the year I couldn't afford to fly home, cried on the phone longer than I did, apologizing for her son in a way that wasn't really her apology to make, but that I understood, in a strange way, she needed to say anyway. His father barely spoke, just told me, at the very end of the call, "You handled that with more class than he deserved," which is the closest thing to a verdict I ever got from that side of the family, and which I still think about sometimes, oddly, as one of the kinder things anyone said to me that whole month. In the weeks right after, there was a strange, almost bureaucratic aftermath I hadn't braced myself for. Vendors needed to be told. My mother ended up writing a group email to the 206 guests, a short, dignified paragraph that thanked everyone for their love and asked for privacy, and I remember reading it over her shoulder and feeling grateful in a numb sort of way that I didn't have to write it myself. Gift returns became their own small ordeal. 3 separate friends offered to handle mailing things back so I wouldn't have to see the registry confirmations again, and I let them because some kindnesses you're allowed to just accept without arguing about it. Rachel lost more than just our friendship, for what it's worth, though I want to be careful not to pretend that's the point of this story. She and Ryan didn't stay together. Apparently, whatever had existed between them couldn't survive being dragged into daylight, which tells you something about what it actually was to begin with. She moved out of the city about 4 months later. I heard that secondhand from Priya, who still checks in on me now and then. I don't feel triumphant about any of that. Mostly, I just feel tired when I think about it. The specific tiredness of loving someone for 9 years and then having to relearn how to talk about them in the past tense. It's been 8 months now. I moved out of the apartment Ryan and I shared. Megan helped me pack, the same way she'd helped me build that quiet folder of evidence. Steady and practical, and never once making me feel like a burden for needing her that much. That fast. After 2 years of drifting, we talk almost every day again, the way we used to in college, and I think we both understand, without ever really saying it out loud, that we're not going to let that kind of distance happen between us again. I don't talk to Rachel. I've made peace with the fact that I probably never will. And stranger than the anger most days is just the grief of it. Losing a person I'd loved for 9 years doesn't stop hurting just because she's the one who caused the loss. There are still moments more than I'd like to admit where something small happens. A good deal on flights, a stupid meme, a song from freshman year, and my hand actually moves toward my phone to text her before the rest of my brain catches up and reminds me why I can't. Grief doesn't care that you were the one who was wronged. It shows up anyway, uninvited, at the worst possible times, like at a grocery store when you see her favorite brand of cereal on the shelf. I've started a therapy, which I probably should have done years before any of this happened, and I've learned a phrase there that I think about more than almost anything else from those sessions. That my instincts were never actually wrong the whole time. I just didn't want to believe them because believing them cost me something I wasn't ready to lose. It turns out I lost it anyway. I just got to choose in the end how I lost it and who was standing next to me when I did. My therapist also asked me once, a few months in, whether I regretted waiting those 11 days instead of confronting them the moment I knew. I've turned that question over more times than I can count. The honest answer is no, not really. Though I understand why some people would. Waiting wasn't about revenge, even though I know it might look that way from the outside. It was about making sure that whatever happened next happened out loud, in front of witnesses, instead of in whispered hallway conversations where I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what version of the truth everyone else had been told. Megan and I took a trip together in the fall, just the two of us. A long weekend upstate that neither of us had planned around anything except getting out of the city. We didn't talk about Ryan or Rachel most of the time. We talked about her job, which she'd finally started hating enough to consider leaving, and about a guy she'd started seeing who I actually liked, cautiously, the way you like someone after you've watched your best friend's judgment get tested and come out stronger for it. On the last night, sitting on a porch with cheap wine and plastic cups, she told me she was sorry it took something this awful to bring us back to being close again. I told her I was sorry too, but that I wasn't sorry about where we'd landed. I picked up a small habit somewhere in those 8 months that I didn't expect, and that I think about as its own quiet form of proof that I came out the other side of this okay. On Sunday mornings, I started going to a farmer's market near my new apartment, alone, no particular reason, just something that was entirely mine, that had never belonged to Ryan or Rachel, or the version of my life I'd built around them. I buy the same coffee from the same stand every week now, and the man who runs it knows my order. And there is something almost embarrassingly small about how much that has come to mean to me. The idea that I can build an entire life, piece by piece, out of things nobody else gets to touch or spoil. It sounds like nothing. It didn't feel like nothing. The first Sunday I realized I'd gone 3 weeks in a row without thinking about the wedding once, until I was already halfway home. People keep asking me if I'd do it differently given the chance. Skip the whole waiting, skip the toast, just end things quietly the moment I found that first text. And maybe some version of me, a calmer, less stubborn version, would have. But I think there's something important in what I actually did, something I'd want any woman listening to this to hold on to. I stopped asking myself whether I was allowed to be sure. For weeks, I second-guessed a feeling that turned out to be completely, devastatingly Accurate because I'd been taught somewhere along the way that certainty without a smoking gun was just anxiety wearing a costume. It wasn't anxiety, it was information, arriving quietly, long before I had proof to back it up. If you're listening to this and some small, quiet part of you already suspects something you don't want to look at directly, a heart emoji, a name that shouldn't make your stomach drop, a friend who's just a little too invested in your relationship, I'm not going to tell you to go blow up your entire life over a feeling, but I will tell you this. The version of you that already knows is usually right, whether or not you're ready to hear it yet. Trust her a little sooner than I did. She's not being dramatic. She's just paying attention. And whatever it costs you to listen to her, it will always cost you less than finding out at the altar, standing in front of 200 people holding a microphone that you were the only one who didn't already know.